Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Moniraha and this is our presentation video for our public sector accounting assignment. So the objective of our assignment is to identify and examine issues involving public sector relating to women and family affairs and to discuss issues pertaining to it. Additionally, we also want to analyze the viability of current regulation and laws in order to assess if additional solutions are required for the problems being discussed. So the ministry that mainly deals with all the areas relating to women and family affairs is the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development. The ministry is responsible for social welfare and handles matters relating to women, family, community, children, older people, destitute, homeless, disaster victim and disabled. The aim is to attain gender equality, family development and a caring society. The ministry is headed by the Minister Reena Harun since 10th March 2020. The Minister is supported by Deputy Minister of Women and Family, who is Siti Zaila Muhammad Yusuf. So the issue that we want to discuss and analyze is domestic violence. The definition of domestic violence as defined by the Ministry on the website is as follows. First, intentional or unintentionally instilling fear of physical injury to an individual. Second, physically injuring the victim. Third, forcing or threatening to perform sexual acts or otherwise in which the victim has the right not to do so. Fourth, lock up or detain the victim without the victim's consent. And fifth, betrayal or damage to property with the intent to cause grief or annoyance to the victim. Incidents of domestic violence are on the rise and have quickly become a social pandemic. If left unchecked, it will contribute to inevitable decline of society as a whole. The Domestic Violence Act 1994 is a law specially enacted for the management and prevention of such cases. Under the purview of this act, the people may report incidents of domestic violence to a social welfare officer or a police officer who will also double as an enforcement officer. According to the act, the victims of domestic violence can include wife or ex-wife, husband or ex-husband, children, parent, and the other family members that stay in the house. Domestic violence can also be categorized as physical abuse, mental, emotional, sexual, and spiritual abuse. Moving on to the causes of domestic violence. The first level of domestic violence can start in a form of a small argument due to increased tension. The husband may then be dominant, leading to wife giving up on her rights. The second phase is how this progresses into the start of violent acts and incidents, usually when the abuser cannot keep control of his rage and then starts to abuse the victim, who is usually the weaker party. This can cause long-term psychological stress and effects for the victim. The third stage is regret. This is where the victim feels regret or guilt after the violence has taken place. The abuser uses this to their advantage to cover up the acts and then pretends to apologize and care for the victim and prevent the victim from taking any action. And thus, the cycle of domestic violence continues.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nurul Sakina. Let's start with our first discussion, which is the available initiative by the government. There are 4 initiatives that we found based on our research. Firstly, talian kasih that been initiated by the Ministry of Women, Family and Community that can be the first step of the community to get help from the various social problems. Secondly, Emergency Protection Order, which is the expansion of Interim Protection Order and Protection Order. EPO is the temporary protection that is given immediately to the victim for 7 days that can be issued by the JKM. Thirdly, Interim Protection Order, which is issued by the Magistrate Court and is valid throughout the police investigation before the case is charged in the court. Once the police has been informed to you in writing that your case has been charged in court, the IPO will be expired within 7 days. Thus, you should apply for protection order as soon as possible. Lastly, protection order is issued by the Magistrate Court and is valid once the case has been charged in court and during the court trial. The PO is valid for 1 year and may be renewed for another year as long as there is an ongoing court trial. I am sure after I am explaining the initiative by the government, you might be wondering, why the number of domestic violence keep increasing even though the government already give the best solution on it? This is because there are still several loopholes in the Domestic Violence Act. that can give the opportunity to the abuser to do the domestic violence. For these issues, I would like to refer to the article by the researchers from University Utara Malaysia on the topic of combating domestic violence in Malaysia, issues and challenges. The first issue that is being raised in this paper is that the legal enforcement focuses more on the physical abuse rather than non-physical abuse. Based on the previous discussion, there are several categories of domestic violence, which includes non-physical abuse, such as emotional and spiritual violence. This is not easy to measure the level of non-physical abuse, especially emotional abuse, to be subjected to domestic violence, and the collection of proof for emotional abuse is more complex and difficult than physical abuse. Secondly, non-marriage violence is not categorized as domestic violence. This is because the act is only applicable to the legal relationship only. However, the act should be extended to the non-marriage violence for the specific reason, for example, during the engagement period. Lastly, the Section 11 Para 1 of the Domestic Violence Act needs to be amended. This means the court can order for reconciliation between the parties. However, the court should give the victim the right to make their own decision whether or not to reconcile based on their confidence to live back with the abuser. The last part of the discussion is the barrier faced by the woman that prevent them from making the report and escape from the domestic violence. Firstly, the victim cultural values and belief. For example, in Islam, the husband will start to threaten the wife that if the wife report it, there will be categorized as issues. Therefore, the victim tried to conceal it and face the violence every day. Next, the lack of knowledge on the law and initiative by the government. The most important thing, the victims do not know that they are facing domestic violence, especially emotional abuse, due to lack of awareness to the public on what are the extended categories of domestic violence other than physical abuse. Lastly, the cost to bring the case to the court is expensive. There will be other costs to be incurred if the case are being dragged for a long time. I know there is bar counsel legal aid that can help the victim for free or low cost. However, the number of lawyers that are volunteering to do this is small and cannot cater the large number of cases.
Historically in Malaysia, there were no laws that indicated that violence against women is a crime, and that motivated non-government organizations to create campaigns to aid and help women advocate their rights. And finally, in 1994, the Domestic Violence Act finally passed the parliament, and Malaysia was the first Muslim country and the first Asian country to adopt that law. The law states and defines domestic violence as fear of physical injury, knowing that is likely to cause distress to the victim. And unfortunately, 39% of women in Malaysia face domestic violence during their lifetime.
You ready?
Yep.
Rest of my life, I don't want to be with anyone but you. What are you doing?
Until death do you part.
I do. Well, maybe I wouldn't have to worry about other guys looking at you if... Hey, you look at me when I'm talking to you. Do you hear me? Look, I didn't want to do that. But you just don't listen. Who's that?
Hey! You sure you're okay? I'm fine.
Who's gonna take you in but me? You will never see your son again. How about next time I make sure you never leave the house again? Guess it's my lucky damn day. Look what I found under the bathroom sink.
Johnny, wait, just no, hold on!
YWCA hotline. How can I help you?
Every day, 24,000 women are abused by someone they love. Just one phone call can help put a stop to it.
the Malaysian government made a lot of active efforts and is still making a lot of active efforts to help the issue of domestic violence women are facing, and that is through conducting surveys and also the amendment of the Domestic Violence Act in 2011 by expanding the application of protection orders beyond the abuser to prevent third parties from physically abusing or even communicating with the victim of domestic violence. However, the Malaysian government is still criticized for not actively funding campaigns that support domestic violence victims. There has been also a small body of research conducted in order to recognize the consequences of such violence. On the other hand, in Bangladesh, there has been a higher rate of reported cases of domestic violence. However, Bangladesh adopts the same law Malaysia is adopting at the moment. However, in Morocco, the survey shows that 55% of women face domestic violence, which is 15% more than Malaysia. Although Morocco has a violence act, the act does not define domestic violence as a separate entity, rather defines violence in general. Unlike Malaysia, the Parliament of Malaysia was specific with the definition of domestic violence. The Moroccan government is criticized for not being specific with police officer and prosecutors' duties and their responsibility in domestic violence cases, and for not specifying emergency and long-term protection orders and restraining orders for domestic violence survivors at risk of abuse, because they should provide and support services to domestic violence survivors, including shelter, health services, psychological care, legal advice, and hotlines, and the government is not funding these things. Non-profit organizations are trying to create campaigns that help these things, but there has not been a direct impact from the government. However, in the United States of America, when a woman calls a hotline to report a domestic violence case, the assigned police officer knows well their duties and knows that they should arrest the abuser at the spot and not only give a restraining order, unlike Malaysia, Morocco, and Bangladesh, which is that what they advise. They advise that they should get a restraining order and the abuser does not face any real consequences. In Malaysia, Morocco, and Bangladesh, the abuser is not convicted at the first stage of domestic violence. Rather, the victim is giving a protection order, a restraining order, and when the abuser violates that order, that is when they are prosecuted. Unlike the United States, they would get convicted in the first stage of the domestic violence and not given another chance.
Assalamualaikum and hi, today I'm going to explain about the proposed solution or recommendation that we can use to